Welcome to The Point. I am your host, Anna Kasparian, and today we have our last pre-election episode, which means we will talk about issues that are relevant to the election. We're going to talk about rape panels. Why are the Republicans so addicted to redefining rape? We're also going to talk about corporate interests teaming up with social conservatives. What's that all about? And then finally, we're going to talk about the Latino vote and how Republicans are doing everything they can to stomp on it. Now, first, I want to join our panelists, or introduce our panelists. Rick Overton is our first panelist of the day. He is an Emmy Award-winning TV writer, comedian, and actor who's been doing social and political comedy for decades. He also just hosted a fundraiser for Alan Grayson at the Hollywood Improv. I love Alan Grayson. How did that fundraiser go?
Oh, it went great. Sarah Silverman was the headliner, and she killed. And then Alan went on after Sarah and did great, which none of us wanted to follow Sarah. We all made sure we were ahead of Sarah, and then Alan goes and caps it at the end. The guy's just brilliant. He's a hero. You know?
I definitely have my fingers crossed that he makes his way back into Congress, because he's a true leader, true progressive, fights for the real issues.
Yeah, one of the good guys.
Definitely. Desi Doyen, one of our regulars here on The Point. It's a pleasure to have you back, Desi.
Thanks.
For those of you who are unfamiliar with her, she is the co-host and managing editor of the nationally syndicated Green News Report at bradblog.com, billed as the most scintillating 6 minutes in Green radio news, as well as a frequent panelist on The Point. You keep coming back. You must really love us.
I do. You guys are aces. You're so much fun to hang out with. It's always a blast, and you talk about really important stuff.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Kathay Feng. She is the executive director of California Common Cause, an organization dedicated to election reform, campaign finance reform, media access, and the voting rights of traditionally disenfranchised communities. Now, it's interesting because you know our executive producer, Steve-O, who is also referred to as our audio guy. Do you want to tell us a little tidbit about him in college?
Well, I haven't talked to him since he was released from prison on parole, so I really don't know. I'm impressed that he could be rehabilitated. I'm glad that he's got a job, and you know, good for him for re-entering society in a good way.
Right, he really turned things around.
Yeah.
All right, let's get right to the issues. The first topic has to do with rape panels. Now, the Republican Party seems so concerned with redefining rape, and it seems like it's one of the most unpopular issues you could possibly talk about, but they keep going. Now, this guy by the name of Cenk Uygur did a point for us. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. Let's check out the video.
Hi, I'm Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, and I've got a point to make about Republicans and rape. Now, they've said a lot of unfortunate things recently, including, of course, Todd Akin talking about legitimate rape and how your body as a way of shutting that whole thing down and not getting pregnant if you've been legitimately raped, as opposed to, I suppose, illegitimately raped. And now, of course, we have Richard Murdoch running for Senate in Indiana talking about God-intended rape. And well, you know, if you had that kid, apparently God intended for you to have that kid by rape or by other means, apparently. I think it's grotesque. But the real reason they do this is because so many of their candidates, including over 15 candidates right now for the Republicans that are running in these elections, say there should be no exception for rape or incest in getting an abortion. Well, if there's no exception, then you got to realize, my God, some of these women are going to have the kid of their rapist, and in 31 states, they get parental visitation rights. The father does. So, in which case they've got to live with that guy coming over for 18 years. That is so hideous, even to the most right-wing conservative, that they've got to make an excuse. Say, oh, no, it's okay. She won't get pregnant anyway if it's illegitimate. No, it's okay. God intended it, etc. But now they'll say, hey, Mitt Romney, he has an exception for rape or incest. He's not as radical as them. Well, who decides? Would it be a government bureaucrat? Would you need a panel to decide whether you were actually raped or not raped? There's already legislation pending in the House in Pennsylvania that says that you would have to prove that you were raped. You'd have to go get notifications from the court, etc. Well, what if you wind up with a pregnancy that's going to come to term before your accuser is convicted? So that's too late, right? Well, what if you have the abortion and then it turns out that the guy is acquitted? Then are you going to go to jail? Well, I don't know. Step in front of our government rape panel and they'll get to decide. These guys who complained about the death panels are now pushing laws that in essence would have government bureaucrats deciding whether you were legitimately raped or not. And that is beyond outrageous. And it's obviously not small government, it's gigantic, intrusive government brought to you by the Republicans.
Now that was Young Turks host Cenk Uygur, and you know, he brings up a very fascinating angle of this story, which is a rape panel to justify an abortion if we do find a way to restrict abortion even further. Now, Desi, I want to start off with you. Where is this all coming from? Why are the Republicans focusing on rape so much this year, especially when it doesn't seem like it would be a popular topic to discuss?
Well, it isn't a popular topic to discuss. This is, I think, the prime example of the religious extremist takeover of the Republican Party. You know, the Tea Party rise actually was sort of the culmination of this long-term, decades-long effort by the religious right, starting in the 70s, to sort of move themselves into the public sphere. Now they're here. Their long-term goal now, I think, is to outlaw abortion and to eventually outlaw birth control, because what they really want is sort of a theocratic takeover of the U.S. government. This is the kind of government, the kind of involvement of religious right extremists. They believe this is where they are supposed to be putting their efforts, in turning the U.S. government over to a more Christian and a more religious right-wing kind of nation. You know, I mean, it's in the GOP platform officially to outlaw abortion in all cases, including rape, incest, and to save the life of the mother. And in order to outlaw abortion completely, they will have to redefine rape in order to pass it through, because most Americans are in favor of allowing abortion in cases of rape.
Rick, a lot of people are concerned that this is a way of controlling women. Do you feel that this is kind of a strike back to the women's movement and, you know, a way of kind of holding them down? Because honestly, a woman's economic success is based on whether or not she can plan her family future. And is this a way that, men who are concerned about the rise of women are trying to keep women down? Is that part of it?
Well, it looks, here's the math of it. Why you put so much work into something like that unless that's something you plan on doing all the time? Mm-hmm. I mean, why make it a law? You can't do anything to the guys doing it unless they're sending waves of guys out to do it. And it's like the whole thing with birth control is that's slowing down the matrix-like production of worker eggs for them. It just seems like an odd thing to deal with. It's so controversial. Why would you bother putting yourself on the line to look like you're saying that unless it's so strategically important that you put those laws in place? I say take them on their word, and I say women, stand your ground. Mm-hmm. Stand your ground, seriously and permanently stand your ground.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because on one hand you have the Republicans that are focusing on restricting abortion, banning abortion, but there's also another angle of this that I don't think people are focusing on enough. When you redefine rape, you give men who want to rape women a pass, right? Because all of a sudden, first of all, it's hard enough to prove that someone has raped you, right? It's hard to prosecute that individual, which is why a lot of times rapes go unreported. But if someone is trying to redefine rape, and it's like legitimate rape, was it forcible rape, was she a virgin? I mean, all of these questions come up, and it kind of gives, you know, predators, sexual predators, a pass. What do you think about that, Kathy?
I mean, you're putting all of the onus back on the victim, right? Mm-hmm. To prove whether or not she's got a case, and if so, whether or not she has the ability to control what's in her body. The reality is that this is a serious issue. Whether it's talking about abortion, which is the real issue, or rape, right? And it's very personal. And it really shouldn't be cheapened by mixing it in political campaign talk where everything gets reduced to 2-second sound bites, and we start talking about ridiculous notions like whether rape was legitimate or not. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of these people haven't thought deeply about the issue. They frankly haven't had a conversation with people who've gone through this situation. And I think they're just running on a platform on autopilot. And it's unfortunate because it's a serious issue that we need to talk about. And we should take it out of the campaign setting. It's ridiculous.
I would love to take it out of the campaign setting. On one hand, I tell myself, well, if this is what the Republican Party, if this is what the right wing honestly believes, well, I want them to be transparent about it because it's going to help. It's not going to help them in the polls. But at the same time, you look at the polls, the presidential polls, and you see that Barack Obama and Mitt Romney are doing, you know, about the same in terms of public support, which is fascinating to me. And another thing is, you know, with women voters, Obama's influence is beginning to shrink. Desi, why do you think that's happening? Why do you think that there are women out there who are still willing to vote for Republican members of Congress and Mitt Romney?
I have no idea, because to me, honestly, I think that I look, you know, when you look at the polls across America, you know, and it shows that Americans overwhelmingly are in favor of legal, safe abortion, at the very least in the cases of rape, incest, and death, save the life of the mother. And yet you do see all of these very strong component of women voters who still support these Republican candidates that want to restrict their rights, have extreme government intrusion into their bodies and their medical decisions, you know, willing to overturn established law that says that there is a right to this. And I personally, I don't understand it. I have not spoken with any woman who can explain this to me about why they are interested in giving up that part of their rights.
Oftentimes when I come across a conservative female, they'll tell me, well, I'm not defined by my vagina. That's usually what their main argument is. And it's not about being defined by your vagina.
No.
It's about voting for the party that's actually going to support your freedom and choices that you want to make for your own body. Now, just to give you guys some of the numbers, about 13,700 women become pregnant because of rape or incest in this country. That is a huge number of women. And if you outlaw abortion, even in the case of incest or rape, these are women who have to deal with that for the rest of their lives. And in a lot of states, the rapist can fight for custody rights, and all of a sudden, she's gonna have to deal with the rapist unless she goes to court and prosecutes and proves that she got raped. I mean, it's adding insult to injury. So what do you guys think is the likelihood that this kind of catastrophic scenario actually happens? I mean, rape panels, when you hear rape panels, you immediately think of death panels, right? And the Republicans sounded so clownish with that ridiculous argument that, you know, rape panels might seem a little far-fetched. But if Romney does get elected, do you guys think that he has the influence and the power to actually make this kind of scenario become a reality? Desi, I'll start with you.
Yes, I believe he does. He would, because there's going to be several Supreme Court vacancies potentially coming available during the next 4 years during a potential Romney term. And if enough of Republicans get elected to Congress, of these, you know, extreme religious Tea Party Republicans get elected to Congress, they'll be able to pass those laws, and then those laws will come up both in the state legislatures and in Congress. And the Supreme Court will probably, at that point, attempt to overturn Roe v. Wade. And I think this is a very dangerous precipice that we are on, because, like I said before, it's not just about abortion. I think eventually the long game is to outlaw birth control and to repeal Griswold versus Connecticut, which was 1965. Women have only had the right to use contraception since 1965.
Rick, do you want to jump in?
Well, you thought gun sales were going through the roof before? Watch if this happens. Women will be one of the primary new waves of gun owners. And though I am not a believer in violence for all solutions, I think history may show America was won by a musket, and maybe women's freedom has to be won by you learn to defend yourself. I'm serious. Krav Maga. Start getting serious now, Krav Maga, and learn to take care of business. Take it from a guy, you know. I'm saying this is something you're going to have to face. Not facing it doesn't work.
I mean, it is kind of crazy. We still have to fight for our rights. That this fight keeps coming up again and again. One of the things that you guys sent was this article, Jill Filipovic, where she said they believe women are vessels, women are the property of men. They think, quote, women are both fundamentally unintelligent and dishonest, and that they will lie about these things, and they cannot be allowed to make these decisions for themselves. That's the long game.
You know, I'm very curious as to whether or not this kind of attack on women is leading to the rise of libertarian ideology, because now more than ever, libertarian ideology is getting a lot more credibility. And part of the reason is because while they might be fiscally conservative, you know, they're very liberal when it comes to some social issues. And if you look at the polls among young Republicans, most of them want to pretend like this whole social conservative stuff isn't really happening. But it's a reality right now, and it's really fascinating to see, you know, middle-aged to elderly men dictating what women are going to do with their bodies. It's crazy. And it also reminds me of back alley abortions. I mean, if you are a victim of rape and you get pregnant as a result of that rape, I mean, some women will get desperate and they will take matters into their own hands if if abortion is unavailable to them.
Yeah, I think unfortunately the reality is that the population that this impacts on the most are women who don't have access to a private doctor, a woman who's going to be desperate because she doesn't have the money to be able to go to a clinic of her choice or find alternative access to health care, right? And so it's really going to fall most heavily on minority women, people who don't have money, and that unfortunately is the divide that's being created in our country, right? And I think if we look back a couple of decades ago in California, we had these kinds of wedge issue warfare on immigrants, on young women, on a whole host of social issues. And the effect was, although some of those anti-immigrant, anti-affirmative action laws got passed, the effect was the awakening of a whole new set of voters who said, no, we're not going to take it anymore, right? And so we have a very different dynamics now in California. And I think that this could serve to be the wedge issue that might win once or twice at the ballots, but in the long run, it wakes up a whole new generation of people who say, you know what, this is not a right that I'm going to stand idly by and allow to be taken away. And I think that that's a good thing. I think the more voters who don't take these kinds of elections or these policies for granted, let things happen to them, I think the better, right? Because I think that our democracy depends on people being proactive. And so, if what it does is wakes up a millennial generation to assert what their rights are, then we've got some hope yet.
Yeah. How far does it have to go, though, before they actually wake up and say, hey, wait a second, no, you can't have my rights, I'm still using them? You know?
I'm trying to, kind of hone in on political activism, and Rick and I were talking about that before the show started, but I'm trying to figure out what it's going to take for Americans to get shaken out of their complacency, because we had the Occupy movement, and for a while I do believe that it was a successful movement, but it's it fizzled out, partly because the mainstream media gave them no credibility, and partly because they were kicked out of the areas that they were occupying. But I mean, women's rights are being violated. The middle class and the working class are constantly struggling because of corporate welfare. The country is hurting right now, and you don't see people rising up and fighting against it.
It's one of the results of Blitzkrieg. The whole purpose of Blitzkrieg is hit on so many fronts at once, you don't know where to address any response.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And
they're blitzing us right now on purpose, knowing it always works every time they use it.
Yeah.
And it's like we got to start being Patton and start reading Rommel's book again and get back on the field. And that's the kind of thing Grayson does. He reads the opponent's book. And right now, the only lucky break I think we have right now is that everything the Republicans doing ultimately blows up back in their faces. Like they're buying all their tricks from the same Acme company that the Coyote buys all his gadgets from. Almost everything is running them off a cliff. And I'm not sure about all the presidential polls. Whenever every close race goes 49-51, I start to smell a rat in that polling system. They love to put 49 to 51, and that everyone is logically agreeing about those other things. You're saying it cannot equal sign to this number.
Right. I do think that sometimes when I look at the polls and they're really tight, it makes me think that really what they're doing is they're playing a ratings game, right? And you've got to keep, like, who wants to watch the Super Bowl if it's a blowout,
That's
right? You want to watch a campaign where it's tight, it's neck and neck, whether it's real or not, that's what I want to believe, so that I've got a stake in the game, right? So I don't know that there's that kind of worldwide conspiracy. Maybe you can enlighten us on that because you're a better expert on that. But I do think it is a lot of times the focus on the horse race rather than on the issues is definitely something that we see across the board in mainstream media.
Yes. The focus on the horse race drives me a little crazy, and So I mean, when you look at the electoral votes, Obama is definitely dominating. So it's interesting to see popular votes completely conflicting with that.
And it's not a reason to not get out and vote because you think it's a cinch game now.
Right.
So don't take me wrong by saying that. No, you got to, because now with all the flooding and everything, that's a gigantic chunk of our nation that would have been voting in our favor,
and
that we have to compensate for. And the guys, just fight to switch for paper. Fight to switch for paper. How much time does it take to make a new machine or make some paper?
Right. Well, to bring this full circle, women the Republican Party is launching an assault against you. I'm not saying you're defined by your vagina. I'm saying that you should fight for your rights, and that includes reproductive rights. And I've said it once, I'll say it again, I stand by it 100%. If you are voting for Republican and you have a vagina, you are a moron. You got to focus on your rights. All right, we got to wrap this segment up, but we're going to take a quick break and come back with corporate interests teaming up with social conservatives and, you know, some of the ideas behind that. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Point. I'm Anna Kasparian, host of the Young Turks. You guys can check that out Monday through Friday on youtube.com/The Young Turks. And by the way, I want to encourage you guys to comment on this video. We love hearing your feedback. It helps us produce the show. And of course, constructive criticism always helps. Now, our next point was sent to us by photojournalist Cenk Uygur. And he's actually going to talk about two things that seem to always go hand in hand. Fiscal conservatives and social conservatives. Why are they teaming up? Is there really something going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of? Let's take a look.
Hi, I'm Cenk Uygur. I'm a freelance photojournalist and producer for Truth Out, Greg Palast, and themudflats.net. And my point is, we are looking at a resurgence of the Christian right like you've never seen them before. In a story that I broke for truthout.org, I uncovered that the religious right, in the form of Focus on the Family, National Right to Life, Susan B. Anthony, and several other pro-life right-wing religious groups are working together with the Koch brothers, who is giving them access to their massive voter database, Themis. I discovered this at a fundraiser here in Anchorage, Alaska, for the Focus on the Family related group, Alaska Family Council. The fundraiser was headlined by Governor Sean Parnell. Themis would allow them to target voters cheaper and easier than ever before, as it has info on every American's buying habits, magazine subscriptions, email lists, and most importantly, addresses. If this unholy alliance of big money and big God doesn't scare you enough, then let me throw Karl Rove in the mix. Karl Rove has a database of his own. It's called Data Trust. You can find out more information about that in the book Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, which I researched, and also on gregpalast.com, on zdroberts.com, and of course, read the article at truthout.org. Thank you.
Fascinating video by Cenk Uygur. Rick, I want to start with you. Does this seem to be a natural alliance, corporate interests and social conservatives?
Well, when they say they want to get big government out of things, what's the one thing that stands in the way of complete free reign for corporations? Is government. They're supposed to be like a bank robber saying, you know, I'm against big police departments. Of course you are. You're a bank robber. You don't want the thing that opposes you. I get it. You're doing what you're supposed to. But like in a prisoner of war movie, I'm supposed to dig my way out and escape. You're supposed to catch me, bring me back in. They're following their directives, but the working man that goes along with that has no idea that he's not invited to the rap party. He has no idea that even all the cops in their Star Wars outfit beating everybody up, you're not invited. No one's really invited. Most of them are turning on their own, and they have no idea. It's going to come back and bite on Christians. Christians, you guys, didn't you hear about Book of Matthew? Following the false corporate Christ? Who do you think you are in that scenario? You're not invited. And so I think what we're looking at right now is the last great throw of something that's going to be out of ammo soon. They're making such big, stupid moves. Generally, that occurs when you're almost out. A star burns brightest when it's about to flash out to nothing.
So, Desi, how do evangelicals or anyone who is socially conservative and religious justify some of the tax policies that fiscal conservatives are in favor of? Because at the end of the day, doesn't it really hurt the poor, the working class, and the middle class? And aren't religious individuals supposed to be concerned with helping them?
Yeah, they're supposed to be, but that's changed quite a bit. I mean, this is not the Christian community that was in the 40s and the 50s that was all about helping the poor. You know, there was a faction that came up again in the 60s, the 70s, and especially the 80s with the rise of Ronald Reagan. You know, they discovered that there was this untapped group of voters that were not being motivated or organized or mobilized, and now they have figured out how to mobilize them by bringing in these social wedge issues. Once, of course, they're in power and in politics, they don't actually do any laws that match what the evangelicals want them to. But they are useful idiots. They can get the troops to go out there and work for free to get the vote out. You know, to me, what's striking about this, though, is who's using who. You know, because you have the corporate guys who are putting in millions and millions and millions of dollars to mobilize the vote and to get people to get out there and put in the representatives who will get the regulations out of their way. But then also you have the rise of these right-wing evangelicals who want to bring about a more Christianist nation, and they are kind of using each other for this because they're, you know, working together, and they both have the same goal, which is to take over the government, even though their ends are different.
Politics makes strange bedfellows.
Yeah.
We see this all the time. I mean, you may remember Jack Abramoff, right? The super lobbyist to the casino interests, bringing in millions of dollars to fund who? The Christian right. Why? Because they both had an allied interest in getting rid of Indian gaming casinos, right? So, you know, when you find your interests aligning with each other, then you know, back whichever horse you think is going to run with it. I think the real issue is if folks care about kind of where the money's coming from, you have to ask this question. If your ideals are so upstanding, and if you celebrate the marketplace of ideas, why are these multi-billionaires funneling all of this money in secrecy? What are they so afraid of? Why won't they just put their name to their ideas and stand by their ads? This is the crazy thing. What is so secret that they need to hide and funnel their money through all of these C3s, C4s, charities? Some of them are fake, some of them are real. You know, I think that voters need to demand that we open up that box, right, that black box, and we need to say, look, where's that money coming from? Let's put it all on the table. Let voters make their decisions with full disclosure. None of this secrecy stuff, because I think that's what's most damaging to our democracy.
Definitely. It's interesting to see the Koch brothers work with social conservatives because they gave a sizable chunk of cash to the Cato Institute, and that's a libertarian organization. They don't care about the social issues at all. At the end of the day, the Koch brothers really, really care about, you know, their pocketbooks.
Do the Koch brothers care about the Tea Party, or is the Tea Party just another movement that they've invested in as a way of having another flank attack on
There's a lot of room under
dismantling
their
the government,
bus.
right?
They can throw them under in a second and will.
Right, so I'm not sure that, you know, what their ideology is, but I think it is really troubling that as they funnel money through all of these AstroTurf organizations, the challenge is that they're hiding all of their personal connections, just like we saw in Wisconsin and Ohio, all of those billboards going up talking about how voter fraud is a felony, right? And hiding where that money was coming from. And then when they were finally disclosed and forced to come out of the woodwork, you know, all of a sudden you realize that it's forces who are aligned with a conservative foundation. And so if that's your real intention, why can't you just be honest about it? What's the secret?
In Bible terms, who was the secret guy? Jesus? Was he the secret guy? Moses who? God? Or that other guy?
Right.
Well, it's really difficult to fight and make sure that we figure out who these corporations and, you know, these people like the Koch brothers are funding, because at the end of the day, a lot of the money that they funnel into goes to campaigns. Right. So do politicians want the public to know about that? Probably not. Yeah. Right?
No, because if they found out, I think it's clear that once the public actually understands what's going on in the background, sort of, you know, while you're, you know, the average person, I think, is too busy trying to make a living and raise their kids and get their job and just, you know, make ends meet, that they're not really paying attention, or can't really pay attention to what's happening in the background. And that seems to be, to me, why they don't disclose this, because they know that if enough Americans find out about it, they will put a stop to it. Right. So they want to make sure that they get their people in power, you know, close off all the exits, close off all the avenues, and then by the time the American public wakes up, it will be
if you see the face behind the Darth Vader mask, you're going to be horrified. And so they're going to leave the mask on as long as possible.
As long as they can get away with it.
And they're going to dismantle as many campaign finance laws as possible and fight them, because all power goes to the dark forces who are hidden behind the mask.
It makes it really, it makes it very hard to claw back the kind of open democracy that we were enjoying at one time, and it's obviously this long-term battle that continues to happen. But, you know, overall, I think this just shows how Citizens United was a watershed. All the lines protecting the people from corporate takeover of our government are gone. All of the restrictions, all of the regulations, all the enforcement, it's just gone
and
now.
it influences every single policy decision that every politician makes. I mean, it corrupts every element of our so-called democracy. And I know I'm going to get the emails about how we're a republic. You guys know what I'm talking about, okay? Where we're supposed to have political activism. Political activism is irrelevant when you have corporations funneling a ton of cash into a politician's pocket. A politician isn't going to care about an individual vote when they're getting the funds necessary to run their campaign.
And his vote is guaranteed.
Exactly. So another thing that I kind of want to discuss a little bit is political activism within churches, because this has been a real issue as of late. Churches want the ability to endorse a political candidate without having to worry about the IRS coming after them. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, you know, churches are tax exempt, and as a result of being tax exempt, they are not supposed to endorse a political candidate. They're not even supposed to use words like pro-choice, pro-life, or whatever it is. They're supposed to have a neutral stance on politics because the government does not want to subsidize political activity. Now, Rick, what do you think about this? I mean, first of all, do you even think that churches should be tax exempt?
No. No, not in my, I get religious freedom. But now any church that says you vote for some guy, bang, instantly gone. You know, I mean, I'm not even crazy about the idea of you got to talk to God in a building with a certain shaped stick on the roof. I don't think he looks for particular antennas, or he or she or it. You know, I'm not anti-religion. I'm anti-it becoming corporate. And corporate religion is where everything disintegrates, where the having to keep the lights on in the building becomes more important than what's being said in the building. And that's what's happened to church. It was the corporatization of the institution, making customers return and return. Why don't they wander to another one? Got to force them to say you go to hell if you go to another one. And it's just, it was the first Coke and Pepsi business structure, you know. And we're watching the end of it. There's enough awareness now that I think we will all live to see a generation that's onto that scam.
Oh, I hope so.
Well, thanks to shows like this, you know, we don't see the pond. If those little things had such a giant pond ripple effect, I think things have pond ripple effects, butterfly effects.
Now, I would to disagree a little bit with you on the making churches not tax exempt. I think if a church or a religious organization does legitimate charitable work, that money that would go to taxes would instead go towards, hopefully, feeding the poor, you know, shelter, housing, all of that kind of stuff. But when it comes to a church or a religious organization that is engaging in political activity, I mean, that's strictly forbidden. And it should be enforced, and that's the other problem, is if it's not being enforced.
And now, it's not really being enforced.
Now, I think I remember this correctly, in the 2004 election, the Bush administration Justice Department actually prosecuted or began an investigation against a Pasadena church, if I remember correctly, because it was a Unitarian church or something, and they stepped out and they said, hey, you know, let's talk about these issues, and they were not engaging in direct political advocacy, but they were still being investigated. And yet that's not happening now when you have this overt participation in political advocacy. It's kind of scary.
Yeah. Well, a lot of pastors are being defiant about this, and you know, they're getting together and fighting against the IRS. Some of them are saying, all right, if the IRS wants to get rid of our tax-exempt status, then that's fine with us. We want to make the political endorsements. And you know what? In that case, I'm fine with it too. You want to make your political endorsements? Cool. We're taking away your tax-exempt status. And I want the IRS to also enforce this.
At least that's being honest about kind of making a hard choice and deciding which way you want to go. What I can't stand is folks who want to have their cake and eat it too, right?
Exactly.
I want to be able to take this political position, but I also want, you know, the protection of the government to exempt me from taxes. And I think the same goes, frankly, for, you know, nonprofit organizations that are charities as 501c3s or C4s. You know, you can engage, you can cross the line, right, and engage in political activity, but you just don't get the tax-exempt protection. I mean, is that so hard to understand? I don't understand why, it's particularly, it gets crossed over, the line gets crossed over by people who don't like the intrusion of government, and yet at the same time they want that protection of government when it comes to, you know, giving them a special break on taxes, right?
Yes.
So
they love the government help when it relates to them.
They're flat out hypocrites is what they are. You know, they're all for the Constitution and they're all for all these regulations until it's something that they want to do, and in which case it's big government and it must be dismantled at all costs.
All right, Desi, I'll let you have the last word on that segment. And in our next segment, we will be talking about the Latino Latino vote and how Republicans are trying to destroy it. We'll be back with that. Welcome back to The Point, and our final point was contributed to us by Dominique Medina, and he is fighting against efforts to suppress the Latino vote. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
Hi, my name is Dominique Medina. I'm a community organizer with Promise Arizona in Action. Over the last several years, our community in Arizona has been under attack. Politicians and the sheriff have made a career out of demonizing and scapegoating the Latino community, but we're fighting back. Just this year, we've registered over 34,000 new Latino voters, and now we're doing our best to turn them out to vote. But the elections office here in Arizona have not been making that easy for us. They printed wrong dates for the elections, for the upcoming elections in Spanish, making our community confused and making things harder for our volunteers when they're going out to the doors to turn those people out to vote. Here's my point. The elections offices and the politicians, they can try to disenfranchise us, they could try to deprive us of our right to vote, but as long as we stand firm together, as long as we are committed to each other in our community, then the power of our community is in our hands, not in the hands of politicians who might deprive us of our rights.
Medina talks about a very serious topic that's happening in the U.S. right now, where it's not just the Latino vote. Republicans are trying to suppress the vote, period. And it impacts college-age students, it impacts minorities and elderly individuals. And
veterans,
veterans,
elderly. I mean, it's every single voter population that might have a chance of making their decision independently, and it's scary stuff. It
is scary stuff, and you know, just to give a little more context into what Medina was talking about in that video, with Maricopa County, they originally passed out these voter pamphlets, and on one side, you know, it has the correct date written in English. You know, the elections take place on November 6th. On the Spanish side, it says that the elections take place on November 8th. Now they said, oh, it was a mistake, we didn't do that on purpose. You know, it turns out that last year we had, you know, county elections or something on November 8th. That was not a big deal, right? And then they do it again. They pass out bookmarks that have an English side that has the correct date and a Spanish side that has the incorrect date. So what do you think, Kathy? I mean, I know that this is kind of a leading question, right, but is this really a mistake, or is this a deliberate effort to suppress the Latino vote?
You know, in some ways it doesn't even matter whether it's incompetence or whether it's intentional. The impact is already there, right? You've already put that misinformation out there, and Latino voters potentially are going to go out on the wrong day, and the impact is there. I think the question is, you know, when you look at Maricopa County, it is ground zero for anti-immigrant warfare, right? It's the source of this anti-immigrant legislation that has set precedent in Arizona, but had ripple effects throughout the country. It's where Sheriff Arpaio is. And when you see assault after assault like that, then you have to be, as a registrar, as a county registrar who's in charge of running elections, you've got to be extra vigilant then, right? And if you make the mistake once, that's one thing. But to repeatedly make that same mistake and not catch it the next time around, when you're responsible for elections, you need to be investigated and fired, frankly.
Absolutely, and that's the part of the story.
No excuse.
That's the part of the story that I don't really understand.
Why is she still in office?
I feel as though if someone in the Democratic Party was, you know, even alleged to do something like this, that person would immediately get investigated. That investigation would probably lead to that individual getting fired. But when it comes to Republicans, and when it comes to this kind of shady activity, I feel like the Republicans get away with it because the Democrats are not yelling loud enough. This is unacceptable. Right. It did not happen once, it happened twice. That is your one and only job, right? To focus on the elections.
Right. In the arena of voting rights, that's when law and order matters the most, right? It's when you've got to enforce voting rights of those people who are traditionally disenfranchised. It's when you've got to follow the rules. It's when you've got to make sure that the playing field is even. And this kind of misinformation, again, one time, that's a mistake. But when it goes out repeatedly,
and the mistakes all go in the same direction.
Right, and it happens to emanate, from the same county that's been the source of so much anti-immigrant sentiment. I just think that there needs to be an investigation, and federal law requires that we now take every action possible to ensure that voters have the correct information. So that means not just going out there and talking to Latino and Spanish language media, which I understand that that's what they're doing. I think that the county registrar owes it to those voters to basically mail and contact, whether by telephone or in person, every single voter who might have gotten that kind of information and ensure that they know what the right election day is. They need to make up for their mistake, and this woman and whoever her staff are who have repeated this problem again and again, they need to be removed from their jobs.
Yeah, and also it's part of the partisan infiltration into the election administration system. I mean, we have partisan secretaries of state, like in Ohio, Republican Ohio Secretary of State, trying to restrict early voting hours to only active duty veterans, only active duty members of the military. Nobody else, including veterans, gets to vote on that particular time. You know, when you have partisan secretaries of state who are changing the rules, changing the regulations, and changing the way that they enforce them.
Sending threatening letters to voters that they deem to be not legitimately on the voter rolls, and targeting, as it turns out, 60% who happen to be Latino. Coincidence or not?
How is this not a huge federal crime when you're tampering with one of the most sacred processes of our nation's tenets, you know?
Where is the DOJ in all of this? The Department of Justice.
Where
They seem to
That's
be
what
only,
I'm saying. I mean,
you know, piecemeal prosecuting and investigating these
Jail
events.
time. You do that, bam, clang.
It's pretty shocking. You know, now dirty tricks though are happening all around the country right now. A lot of stories we have at bradblog.com about, you know, covering the dirty tricks that are going on, the flyers, the fake flyers that are going out, the phone calls. People in Florida were getting phone calls telling that they could vote by phone. Don't bother to show up to the precinct. It's fine. You know, all these kinds. Somebody is
Republicans vote on
bankrolling.
Tuesday, Democrats vote on Wednesday.
Right.
Here's
Somebody's
the thing.
paying for this stuff.
As voters, we've got to be extra vigilant. Do not take this for granted, right? And when you get this kind of crappy letter that says you might be removed from the voter rolls, or when you get some kind of misinformation, the number one thing that you need to do, call 1-866-OUR-VOTE. That's the election protection hotline. Report it, because as soon as we start to see patterns, then we kind of can go in there and prosecute. We have been working with local election officials as well as prosecutors, the DOJ, and we have been able to roll back some of these voter suppression laws, right? But the only way that we're going to know about it is if we can respond quickly.
And if you find out about it, which is why you have
to
report it to 866-OUR-VOTE, so you can find out about it, so you can investigate it and follow through.
That's right.
Copy the number they called you on, right?
Save that piece of paper.
Save the piece of
if
paper.
If you got a voicemail on your answering machine, save that. All of that documentation is incredibly important.
Someone walks up on the street, iPhone out, click.
That's right.
Gotcha.
If you're at a poll site, so here's what we're seeing in Southern California, right? These groups that are affiliated with True the Vote, called Election Integrity Project. In Southern California, they're deploying hundreds, they're boasting about 1,000 people who are going to be in the poll sites, who are going to take the law into their own hands, right? Be vigilantes and essentially try to enforce or bully, I don't know what you want to call it, voters, right? Intimidate voters into not being able to vote. If you're in a poll site like that, you're a fellow voter, you stand up for your voter.
That's right.
You take a picture, you document that, you call 1-866-OUR-VOTE, you stand up for that sacred right to cast a ballot. And I think really when we stand together, then we'll be able to shut these folks down.
But it's going to come down to literally, I think, a street fight, basically, the equivalent of a voting street fight on election day.
I'm not trying to encourage fisticuffs.
No fisticuffs here, but this is, we're talking about, you know, head to head, document what's going on, because there are, it's legal.
They're not the only big ones out there on the field that day.
No.
There's going to be a few of us standing around.
I think that the most powerful thing that we have is surveillance, honestly, because we have those smartphones. We can record someone
be a good thing sometimes.
Giving us misinformation. I mean, the cops hate it when we're using our smartphones to tape them while they're beating people up. But at the end of the day, like, I love that we have that ability right now to hold our public officials accountable. So if someone is trying to lie to you guys, you definitely need to record it and turn that information in, because you guys are right. I mean, this is the number one thing that makes this country a democracy. The ability for everyone who wishes to be politically active to actually be politically active. If we're not able to vote, I mean, what good? We might as well live in an authoritarian country.
Right now, that's the only voice we have. That's the only stop stopgap that we have. You know, I think it's really important to understand what the game plan is. You know, the suppression laws that have been going on around the country have been about stopping people from voting.
Stopping certain people.
Stopping certain people from voting.
And that's the
yes.
thing. These laws are manipulative because essentially what they're doing is they're making definitions between who's allowed to vote, who's not allowed to vote, right? And they're making clear choices about that in a way that is intended to skew the election results. And I do hope that not only are we going to fight all of these laws, you know, in courts, but that we activate your listeners and watchers to go out there and be vigilant voters.
And to take care of other people too, you know, that they're informed now, they're armed with the truth to go out there and watch out for their fellow voters, because if they can't stop the vote, they're going to try to delay the vote. Muck up the works, confuse the poll workers, confuse everybody about what's required, make it take as long as possible so that people will give up and leave. Don't leave. Wherever you are, whatever you do not leave.
Cast the ballot.
Vote. Cast your ballot. Tell everyone you know.
Right on.
Cast the ballot.
That's right.
Do not leave until
Yeah.
you've cast your ballot, and record what happens. Send it to 866-OUR-VOTE.
And
And
if
run
there's any-
defense.
Yes, run
and
defense.
if there's any question,
Big guys, show up.
demand for a provisional ballot. If you can't get a regular ballot because there's any kind of question, just ask for that fail-safe ballot. It's a provisional ballot. Every state's required to do it. And then at least you get your ballot into that box, and that's the first step to making sure that your voice is heard.
Yes.
All right. Well, we got to take one more break. Let's do that, and we'll come back with more. And by the way, again, if you are watching this video, comment, give us your feedback. We always appreciate it, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to The Point. I want to thank our awesome Point contributors, Cenk Uygur. You can watch him on The Young Turks Monday through Friday on youtube.com/The Young Turks. Zach Roberts and Dominique Medina. We always appreciate the contributors. They make the show happen. Now, our panelists also make the show happen. Rick Overton, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Tell me a little bit about what you're working on.
Well, I'm doing lots of political shows around town, and we're going to line up some more timing-wise. They're still being lined up, but come out and check out my YouTubes. I got a lot of stuff out there, and Rick Overton, at Rick Overton on Twitter.
Nice, sounds great. Desi Doyen, we love having you on the program.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. You can follow me on Twitter at Green News Report. Pick up all of our stuff at greennews.bradblog.com, and check out our podcast where we cover all the energy environment news that doesn't get covered on mainstream media, but you guys do a great job.
Thank you so much. And Kathay Feng, thank you for being, this is your
First time
here,
Yep.
but you did an excellent
Well,
job.
thank you for having me. Yeah, so, you know, we're working on a lot of issues. If you care about money in politics, you know, check out amend2012.org. We're pushing back. You know, we're going to try to change the Constitution so that we can reestablish that the only people who have the right to vote are human beings, not money, and reestablish one more time that corporations are not, in fact, humans. And then the other thing that I would encourage people to do, be vigilant. If you're interested in election protection, if you want to volunteer, if you just want to tell us what you saw at the poll sites, you can give us a call at 1-866-OUR-VOTE, or you can go onto the website 866ourvote.org.
Excellent. You guys do very important work, and it was a pleasure having you on the panel today. And remember, guys, this is our last show before the election, and I want to emphasize that the elections are on November 6th. I know there's a lot of misinformation out there, especially in Arizona, but make sure you go to the polls. It's important that you vote. You have to be politically active, because if you're not, then the corporations, the wealthy, they get to take over, they get to make the decisions, and you know, your voice needs to be heard as well. Thank you for watching The Point. Please leave your feedback and your comments. We love to read them, and we'll see you guys next week.